Churchill's Maiden speech. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. Speech given by Winston Churchill to the House of Commons, 18th February, 1901. I understood that the honourable member to whose speech the House has just listened had intended to move an amendment to the address. The text of the amendment, which had appeared in the papers, was singularly mild and moderate in tone, but mild and moderate as it was, neither the honourable member nor his political friends had cared to expose it to criticism or to challenge a division upon it, and, indeed, when we compare the moderation of the amendment with the very bitter speech which the honourable member has just delivered, it is difficult to avoid the conclusion that the moderation of the amendment was the moderation of the honourable member's political friends and leaders, and that the bitterness of his speech is all his own. It has been suggested to me that it might perhaps have been better, upon the whole, if the honourable member, instead of making his speech without moving his amendment, had moved his amendment without making his speech. I would not complain of any remarks of the honourable member, were I called upon to do so. In my opinion, based upon the experience of the most famous men whose names have adorned the records of the House, no national emergency, short, let us say, of the actual invasion of this country itself, ought in any way to restrict or prevent the entire freedom of parliamentary discussion. Moreover, I do not believe that the Boers would attach particular importance to the utterances of the honourable member. No people in the world received so much verbal sympathy and so little practical support as the Boers. If I were a Boer fighting in the field, and if I were a Boer, I hope I should be fighting in the field, I would not allow myself to be taken in by any message of sympathy, not even if it were signed by 100 honourable members. The honourable member dwelt at great length upon the question of farm burning. I do not propose to discuss the ethics of farm burning now, but honourable members should, I think, cast their eyes back to the fact that no considerations of humanity prevented the German army from throwing its shells into dwelling-houses in Paris, and starving the inhabitants of that great city to the extent that they had to live upon rats and like atrocious foods in order to compel the garrison to surrender. I venture to think His Majesty's government would not have been justified in restricting their commanders in the field from any methods of warfare which are justified by precedents set by European and American generals during the last 50 or 60 years. I do not agree very fully with the charges of treachery on the one side and barbarity on the other. From what I saw of the war, and I sometimes saw something of it, I believe that as compared with other wars, especially those in which a civil population took part, this war in South Africa has been on the whole carried on with unusual humanity and generosity. The honourable member for Carnarvon Boroughs has drawn attention to the case of one general officer, and although I deprecate debates upon the characters of individual general officers who are serving the country at this moment, because I know personally General Bruce Hamilton, whom the honourable member with admirable feeling described as General Brute Hamilton, I feel unable to address the House without offering my humble testimony to the fact that in all His Majesty's army there are few men with better feeling, more kindness of heart, or with higher courage than General Bruce Hamilton. There is a point of difference which has been raised by the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, upon the question of the policy to be pursued in South Africa after this war has been brought to a conclusion. So far as I have been able to make out, the difference between the government and the opposition on this question is that whereas His Majesty's government propose that when hostilities are brought to a conclusion, there shall be an interval of civil government before full representative rights are extended to the peoples of these countries, on the other hand, The right honorable gentleman, the leader of the opposition, believes that these representative institutions will be more quickly obtained if the military government be prolonged as a temporary measure and no interval of civil government be interposed. I hope I am not misinterpreting the right honorable gentleman in any way. If I am, I trust he will not hesitate to correct me, because I should be very sorry in any way to misstate his views. If that is the situation, I will respectfully ask the House to allow me to examine these alternative propositions. I do not wish myself to lay down the law, or thrust my views upon honorable members. I have traveled a good deal about South Africa during the last 10 months, under varying circumstances, and I should like to lay before the House some of the considerations which have been very forcibly borne in upon me during that period. In the first place, I would like to look back to the original cause for which we went to war. We went to war, of course, we were gone to war with, in connection with the extension of the franchise. We began negotiation with the Boers in order to extend the franchise to the people of the Transvaal. When I say the people of the Transvaal, I mean the whole people of the Transvaal, and not necessarily those who arrived there first. At that time, there were nearly 2.5 times as many British and non-Dutch as there were Boers, but during the few weeks before the outbreak of the war, every train was crowded with British subjects who were endeavoring to escape from the approaching conflict, and so it was that the Uitlanders were scattered all over the world. It seems to me that when the war is over, we ought not to forget the original object with which we undertook the negotiations which led to the war. If I may lay down anything, I would ask the House to establish the principle that they ought not to extend any representative institutions to the people of the Transvaal until such time as the population has regained its ordinary level. What could be more dangerous, ridiculous, or futile than to throw the responsible government of a ruined country on that remnant of the population, that particular section of the population, which is actively hostile to the fundamental institutions of the state? I think there ought to be no doubt and no difference of opinion on the point that between the firing of the last shot and the casting of the first vote, there must be an appreciable interval that must be filled by a government of some kind or another. I invite the House to consider which form of government, civil government or military government, is most likely to be conducive to the restoration of the banished prosperity of the country, and most likely to encourage the return of the population now scattered far and wide. I understand that there are honorable members who are in hopes that representative institutions may directly follow military government, but I think they cannot realize thoroughly how very irksome such military government is. I have the greatest respect for British officers, and when I hear them attacked, as some honorable members have done in their speeches, it makes me very sorry, and very angry too. Although I regard British officers in the field of war, and in dealing with native races, as the best officers in the world, I do not believe that either their training or their habits of thought qualify them to exercise arbitrary authority over civil populations of the European race. I have often myself been very much ashamed to see respectable old Boer farmers. The Boer is a curious combination of the squire and the peasant, and under the rough coat of the farmer there are very often to be found the instincts of the squire. I have been ashamed to see such men ordered about peremptorily by young subaltern officers, as if they were private soldiers. I do not hesitate to say that as long as you have anything like direct military government, there will be no revival of trade, no return of the Uitlander population, no influx of immigrants from other parts of the world, nothing but despair and discontent on the part of the Boer population, and growing resentment on the part of our own British settlers. If there was a system of civil government, on the other hand, which I think we have an absolute moral right to establish, if only from the fact that this country, through the imperial exchequer, will have to provide the money, if you had a civil government under such an administrator as Sir Alfred Milner, it is not for me to eulogize that distinguished administrator. I am sure he enjoys the confidence of the whole of the Conservative party, and there are a great